I shall be speaking on the role of wide-angle imaging and what advantages it has over the conventional image. We all know that we were used to of seeing 30 degree. We wanted to see more of the fundus. So we moved on to 50 degree. We wanted to see still more. So we started asking the patient to look down here and there, and we started preparing montages. And the best we could see with all the montages was 75 degree. This is the 7 Stanfields which we all have been doing with expertise, and this here is the amount of the retina which we would still miss, which we always wanted to look at. So now with the advent of ultra-wide field angiographic camera, which is from Optos, we have an option of moving from 75 to 200 degrees. Now, is it just one of the fancy gadgets to have, or is it really useful to us? Let's see. This is the autofluorescence. You have, of course, seen beautiful autofluorescence imaging by Professor Gupta. This is just an addition to that you can actually scan the entire 200 degrees of the fundus in the real time. Or you can have the color images. You see a lot of green when you are doing color imaging with Optos, because it's not a true camera. It gives you pseudo color. I'm sure it will improve with time, but you can actually see the pathology in the real time. And for fluorescein, it's absolutely brilliant because you get a good quality of the entire fundus. So these are some of the things which you can do. Now let's see whether moving from 50 degree to 200 degree, does it help a retina practitioner in a clinical practice? I was trained very well by Professor Amod Gupta, but still I'm not as good as my teachers in looking at the periphery, because I was really not into putting the sponge or marking the breaks or making the drawings. So I was never very good at that. So for people like me, or the people who are, I'm sure, junior to me, who have not received that kind of training, this is a very good boon for picking up the detachments, breaks, myopic degenerations. Very important for documenting, teaching, patient education, because many a times, patient will not know what we are talking about. Now we have the patient education and of course the medical legal aspects. Now this is an example here. You see there is a break. So I can just tell my fellow, go and laser, and he does the laser, and I'm sitting in my clinic, I can document. I can tell the patient that there is a break here which we are going to laser, and this is what we have done to you. And if there are any other areas, you can document. Or a patient walks into emergency room with a situation like this, GRT, but his fovea is attached. You keep on telling the prognosis and all, he doesn't understand, but the moment you show him this, he knows what you are talking about. Are some of the lesions like Cherpi and all, which can be documented, including the choroidal nevus. Sometimes a diabetic patient like this, the posterior pole, this is a 50 degree of course, which shows that there is a bad detachment. It has a tractional element, but when you see the periphery, besides this traction, there is a huge break sitting there, which can be documented. Or the monitoring after the post-PPV. Taking the images through the gas-filled eye was never so easy, and how much of the gas is left. And the persons usually tell you, I'm seeing small bubbles, I'm seeing fish eggs. And you will say, okay, I have put the gas in the eye. But the moment you show him picture, he knows what's going on and he feels happy about it. Or sometimes this is a picture of a patient, and my colleague actually had a problem due to this, because he was called in the emergency for a patient which he operated about 3 weeks ago. And the patient said he had a post-op follow-up 1 week before this picture. He was not seen by an attendee, he was seen by a fellow who missed retinal detachment. So the patient was upset and angry that his case of redetachment has been neglected. Fortunately, the fellow had done a picture 1 week ago, which showed the retina was attached at that time, but when he came 1 week later, his retina was detached. So it was not a case of a neglect or anything, it was just the retinal detachment developed after 1 week. So it's a great tool to document from the medico-legal aspect as well. We actually in PGI cannot help without talking about uveitis. So it has a very great role in the intraocular inflammations. For example, this is a patient who was being managed by one of my colleagues, and the patient is after infliximab infusion. He happened to be in my clinic, and I had to decide whether he needs to receive another infliximab infusion or not. His vision was very good and he looked quite to me. So this is the standard 50-degree photo. It showed the fluorescence, which was fantastic. So no active disease. Probably next infusion can wait and patient can be on CellCept or so. Till the time you look at the 200-degree and you realize all is not well. This central frame is 50-degree and you see there is something going on here. So you do the angiogram, and these areas here in the oval, they show there is something there, and sure enough, it has active vasculitis in the periphery. So if it's a Behçet's, and all of us who are dealing with these entities, we know that you don't quit treatment at this stage, because if I had not given him infliximab, he would come after a few weeks or even sometimes within few days with a recurrence and sometimes with hypopyon. This is a patient again of presumed intraocular TB with the healed lesion. Again shows some healed granulomatous lesions, but by and large it was quiet. Fluorescence looks beautiful on the 50-degree field until you go to 200-degree. You realize how TB can cause occlusive vasculitis, and in the patient which has uveitis, which has some degrees of synecdoche attached to it, looking at the periphery is not very easy, and sometimes all of us miss these areas of capillary non-perfusion. That is why patient comes with a bleed and then we end up calling it Eales disease. But if we are able to pick up our patients at this stage and do the laser, probably many of these eyes we would be able to prevent them from going into a phase of recurrent vitreous hemorrhage. Diabetes, of course, is the mainstay. We are the world capital of diabetes, so we have to see the applicability of Optos in diabetic retinopathy. In diabetic retinopathy, per se, it has led to change in the management strategies. For example, we always said diabetes is a disease of the posterior pole, and that was because we were not actually studying the periphery of the disease. So this is what we were always studying. This is what we can see now. Optos ultrawide, I have no financial interest in Optos, by the way, just the ultrawide imaging of this patient, which we saw here, which looked fine. You look at it, it shows probably everything is fine. These are some of the artifacts, mind you, which you get very commonly in the color image. But when you look at the fluorescein, it reveals that there is significantly more disease burdens, and there are large areas of peripheral ischemia or the non-perfusion, and of course more areas of retinal neovascularization which you can identify. So So this is the right eye. Again, you see something is happening here in the far periphery, whereas the area which we always believe to be the metabolically active area where the burnt of the diabetes was, looks fine. And when you do the fluorescein, you see the entire disease process is actually in the periphery, and you are getting macular edema, which we now assume that is because of this disease burden in the periphery, which is producing VEGF and contributing towards the development of macular edema. So doing the focal lasers to this area is probably not going to help unless you treat or you manage the periphery as well. So this ultra-wide field fluorescein angiography has helped us in assessing the amount of the non-perfusion or ischemia, because it has been correlated that higher the glycosylated hemoglobin, which means poor the control, the more is the non-ischemia in the periphery. Probably that is why we used to say that the patients who have high glycosylated hemoglobin would have recalcitrant macular edema, because we were never treating the periphery for macular edema. The second change is that I am no longer doing, not I, but most of the retina people have shifting over from PRP to TRPs. We are no longer burning the retina like hell, killing all the retina with PRP. We are moving more towards targeted photocoagulation to the areas where it is actually needed. We are doing more and more angiographic treatment to limit the peripheral loss in the patients. We are using a lot of Navilas, but we are importing the Optos images to Navilas so that you can actually see the areas in the periphery which needs to be targeted. This ultra-wide field images can demonstrate more than double the amount of the retinal pathology like non-perfusion and new vascularization when we compare it to our sacrosanct 7 standard fields by standard 7 diabetic fields. And it provides more information for deciding how to treat someone with clinically significant macular edema. For example, you can see here, this is a patient with recalcitrant macular edema, but there is a lot happening here which is responsible for causing this kind of recalcitrant macular edema. And this is a patient who is actually post-PRP. You can see it's quite a heavy PRP, but you still see there is edema persistent. Probably you don't need to kill the entire retina for PRP and you still have the edema. So even if you have done targeting, and we have our paper coming now comparing the TRP with the Pascal laser and showing that they are beneficial. And here is the already published report saying that since PRP can have significant morbidity, TRP is the solution. My time is running out, so I will just quickly run over the last case of angiomas, where you can see that 50 degree does not show, but you move on. And of course, you can scan, you can look at the new angiomas in the periphery, and you know what to do with them.